Welcome to the Strategy Sync YouTube channel. Please subscribe to hear new book summaries. Today, we are launching an extensive deep dive into a management philosophy that is, and I'm not exaggerating, absolutely essential for anyone leading a team. I mean, if you get this wrong, it can quite literally define and, frankly, doom your entire career.
It really can. Our analysis today is built around one revolutionary book, Kim Scott's Radical Candor: How to be a kick-ass boss without losing your humanity.
And our mission for you today is, it's far more than just a summary. We're going to be extracting the absolute core of the philosophy and then really drilling down into the practical, implementable tools that Scott developed.
Yeah, these are tools she honed across her tenure at places like Google and Apple University. We want to show you exactly how to navigate that incredibly difficult territory of building trusting, resilient, high-performing relationships.
At the end of the day, the goal is driving superior results, but doing it in a way that truly respects the human being.
Right. You have to figure out how to avoid accidentally sliding into one of two roles. Either the nice incompetent or the dreaded abusive tyrant.
I think the best way to really understand the urgency of this book and why you should care immediately is to start with the devastating failure that basically birthed the entire idea.
It's the ultimate cautionary tale.
Scott recounts this moment early in her career when she was running a company called Juice Software. It became the hinge upon which her entire future management philosophy would turn.
This is the story of Bob, and it is the complete and utter failure of niceness in a professional context. It's what happens when you prioritize avoiding short-term discomfort over long-term kindness.
Okay, so let's unpack this moment in, forensic detail. Scott had hired Bob, and he was, by all accounts, a likable, really nice guy who was diligently trying to contribute.
But the problem was, his work was terrible.
Terrible. She describes a key project where he'd been working for weeks on this one document. It was supposed to be a guide explaining a core product feature. And when she finally reviewed it, she was just utterly shocked. She described it as totally incoherent, a kind of word salad.
And what's so psychologically crucial here is that Bob wasn't entirely oblivious to his own performance. When he handed the document over, Scott notes that she saw the shame in his eye.
Right, and a sort of apologetic smile.
Exactly. He knew the quality wasn't there, but he was hoping management would just sort of sweep in, tell him it was fine, and save him from the pain of confrontation.
And that confrontation is the paralyzing moment that I think every single manager experiences at some point. Scott admits she really liked Bob. She feared his emotional reaction, noting he looked so nervous he might cry right there.
And worse, she was terrified that if she pushed too hard, the rest of the team would instantly label her as an abusive bitch.
A label that had been cruelly applied to her by a terrible boss she had worked for earlier in her career.
So she was managing from a place of past trauma, really.
Completely. That past trauma, combined with the pressure of the moment, led her right down the path of least resistance. She convinced herself that telling Bob the truth would hurt his feelings too much.
And frankly, she rationalized that fixing the document herself would just be faster than patiently teaching him how to rewrite it.
So she handed it back, gave him a small note of vague praise, something like, "This is a good start," and told him she would help him finish it. And this was the catastrophic mistake, the absolute antithesis of what she would later call radical candor.
That's it. She defined this failure as ruinous empathy.
And the consequences of that ruinous empathy were just brutal. They extended far beyond Bob. I mean, first, for Bob himself, that false, vague praise was toxic.
It really was. It messed with his perception. It removed any real incentive he had to try harder, and it allowed him to deceive himself into believing he was fundamentally fine. He wasted 10 months thinking he was on track.
10 months. And for the team, you can argue the damage was even worse.
Oh, absolutely. Colleagues aren't stupid. They knew the quality of Bob's work. They resented having to constantly cover for his subpar output, often staying up late to fix his mistakes.
So quality suffered, deadlines were missed, morale just plummeted because they felt they were carrying dead weight.
But maybe the deepest damage was to the manager's standing. The team started to fundamentally question if Scott, their manager, even knew the difference between genuinely great work and mediocre work.
And that suspicion, that lack of trust in managerial judgment, it just quickly erodes the very foundation of a high-performing culture.
It has to. The inevitable conclusion finally arrived 10 months later when Scott had no choice but to fire him. And that scene, over coffee, is the heartbreaking punchline of the story. Bob asked the absolutely devastating question.
Why didn't you tell me? I thought you all cared about me.
That phrase, it just hits you in the gut, doesn't it? Scott realized her attempt to be nice, to protect his feelings in the short term, resulted in Bob losing his job a year later, having learned absolutely nothing.
And having wasted a massive amount of his career potential, it was unfair to him and totally unfair to the team.
Yeah, and Scott noted that Juice Software actually failed not long after she fired Bob. This personal disaster taught her there's a straight, undeniable line from a lack of honest guidance to total team dysfunction and ultimately catastrophic business results.
So she realized that management requires undoing a lifetime of cultural training. We are raised with this social norm. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all.
Right. But suddenly, as a boss, it is your job, your moral obligation, as the book strongly suggests, to say the hard thing, to deliver the necessary criticism.
And that deep, painful realization led her to develop the core management philosophy, which she refined while leading these massive teams at Google and then codified while teaching at Apple University.
And Radical Candor is not a strict set of rigid rules. It's a highly flexible framework built on two fundamental, non-negotiable dimensions that must coexist in every effective relationship with a direct report.
Okay, so dimension 1 is on the vertical axis, and she calls it care personally. This means going far beyond just being professionally neutral.
It means bringing your whole human self to work. It requires managers to genuinely care about the people who work for them as complex human beings, with lives, goals, and insecurities, not just as interchangeable cogs performing a job.
So it's explicitly personal, not just business.
Exactly. And dimension 2 is on the horizontal axis, challenge directly. This is the requirement to communicate your feedback clearly enough so there is not too much room for interpretation.
Which eliminates the vagueness that led to the Bob scenario.
Right. But here's the critical nuance. This must be done humbly. Radical candor is defined as offering your view and expecting the other person to offer theirs. It's rejecting the belief that you, as the boss, know the ultimate truth. You are presenting a perspective to help them, not some kind of divine decree.
What's genuinely fascinating, and I think counterintuitive to most people, is the paradox here. We fear that challenging someone will lead to lasting anger or vindictiveness. But Scott found the opposite to be true.
Yeah. When people know you truly care about them, even the initial negative emotions they experience when challenged are fleeting. They realize that criticism is a gift, and they are usually deeply grateful for the candor.
The book provides the perfect gold standard example of this working in the famous story.
Oh, this is a great one. So Scott had just joined Google and gave a successful presentation to the executives. Afterward, her boss, Sheryl Sandberg, pulled her aside.
And Sheryl started the conversation perfectly with praise, acknowledging her smarts and the successful presentation, which effectively established the care personally dimension.
Right. But eventually she got to the point, Scott said, too much.
And Scott's immediate reaction was pure resistance, the very reaction managers fear. She initially brushed it off, calling it a minor verbal tic that wasn't a big deal.
So Sheryl, recognizing that defensive wall going up, had to turn up the dial on the challenge, directly dimensioned to break through. She looked Scott in the eye and delivered that famous line.
You are one of the smartest people I know, but saying, so much makes you sound stupid.
Now that is radical candor. It was blunt, shocking, and impossible to ignore. But the key is what Sheryl did immediately afterward.
She followed up instantly by offering to recommend and pay for a speech coach.
Exactly. She didn't just point out the flaw and walk away. She provided tangible, immediate support to fix the problem. The challenge was crystal clear, but the personal care was undeniable.
And Scott accepted the help and saw massive improvement after only 3 sessions. The effectiveness was proven, immediately.
That perfect moment brings us to the famous XY framework, the 4 quadrants of guidance, which provides a map for every managerial interaction you will ever have. It shows what happens when you correctly or incorrectly combine care personally and challenge directly.
Okay, so let's use that framework to understand not just the ideal, but the 3 major ways we fail.
First, you have radical candor, high care, high challenge. This is the goal. It's the zone of clear, humble, yet forceful communication, driven by a genuine desire to see the person sitting across from you improve and succeed.
That's the Sheryl Sandberg model.
That's it. Second, the one we started with, the one that killed Juice Software. Ruinous empathy, high care, low challenge. This is the most common managerial failure.
Where you truly care about the person, but you are so paralyzed by the reluctance to cause momentary discomfort that you offer vague praise or delay necessary criticism.
And you end up failing them in the long term, resulting in the Bob scenario.
Then you have the challenging boss who completely skips the caring part. Obnoxious aggression, low care, high challenge.
The realm of the classic jerk boss challenging others without showing any human decency or respect.
But here's the book's tough, kind of controversial argument, and I want to hear your analysis on this. Scott argues that while it's destructive, obnoxious aggression is actually the second best thing you can do after radical candor.
It sounds dangerous, right? But the argument is built on transparency. Even if the boss is an uncaring jerk, at least people know exactly where they stand and they can course correct.
Or just quit if the environment is toxic.
Exactly. In contrast, ruinous empathy leaves the employee misled and unaware they are failing, wasting their time and their career. So while you should never aim for obnoxious aggression, the data shows ruinous empathy causes more protracted, career-ending damage.
So the damage is faster, but maybe less deep when compared to the betrayal of ruinous empathy.
That's the idea. It's the lesser of two evils, but we have to be careful here. We see obnoxious aggression in the story of Ned, a manager who showed up in an expensive tux to a team party where the theme was goofy costumes.
Right, and to cope with his own insecurity, he singled out a direct report dressed as a leprechaun and shouted in front of everyone, "I said to dress in your national costume, not to dress like a fool."
That is challenging, but the intent was pure humiliation, not help. And the worst form of this, which Scott calls cruel empathy, is truly toxic.
That's when a manager uses insights into a person's personal vulnerabilities, something they shared in confidence, maybe to hurt or degrade them.
Yeah, that instantly and permanently destroys all trust.
But the absolute worst quadrant, the one you have to avoid at all costs, is manipulative insincerity. Low care, low challenge.
This boss is neither caring nor challenging. Their behavior is often driven by a deep fear of conflict, political maneuvering, or, worst of all, a belief in their own superiority, that the employee is so inferior they aren't even worth the effort of honest engagement.
The book shares an anecdote that illustrates this passive-aggressive toxicity perfectly. There was a manager named John Doe who was tasked with compiling justifications for his team's year-end bonuses.
And he was so checked out and uncaring that he didn't even bother to read the justifications sent by his direct reports. He just copied and pasted them into a new email, intending to send them to the team as justification for their pay.
The results were just utterly demoralizing and dishonest. Because he hadn't read them, the unedited justifications revealed all this internal political maneuvering and deep managerial assumptions.
So one person learned they were being paid half of what they should have been, and that their boss assumed they were looking for other jobs because he couldn't retain talent.
Another learned their primary job function was described as doing all the dirty work.
And hilariously, a third employee was given a bonus specifically for covering John, revealing to the whole team that John Doe was such a non-performer, the company had to pay people extra just to work with him.
It's incredible. Even complimentary feedback, when it's delivered with manipulative insincerity, makes people feel worse, not better, because it completely lacks integrity and care.
It's the combination of the lie and the neglect that is just so poisonous.
To really cement this framework in a simple, practical way, the book uses the universal low-stakes, flies-down analogy. Imagine a colleague, Alex, walks out of the restroom with their fly open. How do you respond in each quadrant?
Okay, so in the Radical Candor quadrant, because you care about Alex's professional image and you want to help, you discreetly pull them aside and whisper, "Hey, Alex, your fly is down. Hope you don't mind me mentioning it."
You save them long-term embarrassment. Simple.
But if you shouted, "Hey, everyone, look, his fly is down. What a dummy," in front of the entire office, that's obnoxious aggression. Alex can still fix the problem immediately, but it's done solely to humiliate them.
Okay, and if you notice the fly, but, fearing Alex is shy and will be terribly embarrassed, you say nothing, letting them walk around all day with their shirts sticking out.
That's ruinous empathy. By the time Alex notices, the embarrassment is multiplied tenfold, and they rightfully wonder why you didn't have the simple courtesy to mention it. That silence fundamentally betrays the relationship.
And finally, manipulative insincerity would be if you saw the fly was down, said nothing because you were worried about how you looked bringing it up.
But then later gossiped about Alex's lack of professional decorum to appear over lunch, purely for self-validation.
That analogy is so simple, but it provides that jolt of awareness. It allows you to immediately ask yourself, am I being ruinously empathetic right now? And if the answer is yes, you know you have to just say it with care. So, we've established the foundational philosophy: care personally and challenge directly. But being a manager involves more than just giving feedback, right? It means orchestrating a team and driving results.
And this leads us into the next section of the book, which structures the manager's job itself using a diagram of an inner circle, with you, the manager, placed squarely at the center.
This visualization is crucial because it clarifies that your role is a nexus of relationships.
Right. The manager is at the core, surrounded by relationships. And those relationships aren't optional. They're the engine that drives your 3 non-negotiable core managerial responsibilities.
The first is guidance. Creating that culture of constant, two-way radical candor, making sure everyone is moving in the right direction and constantly improving.
The second is managing the team, understanding what truly motivates each unique individual, their career goals, their ambitions, their need for stability or growth, to avoid burnout or boredom and maintain cohesion.
And the third is achieving results, driving outcomes collaboratively through smart, efficient processes.
And the core insight here is that the quality of your relationships with your direct reports creates a ripple effect, shaping the entire organizational culture outwardly. A manager cannot have a ruinously empathetic relationship with one person without damaging the culture for everyone.
Focusing specifically on team motivation, Scrick points out that one of the hardest things a manager has to do is let go of their own ambitions and their own judgments about what professional success looks like.
Absolutely. Not everyone wants to climb the corporate ladder. And critically, a functional team needs both momentum, growth, and strength, stability. You need both types of people.
This leads to the famous, and I think often misunderstood, distinction between superstars and rock stars.
Let's define them clearly. Superstars are those on a steep growth trajectory. These are the people who need constant challenge, constant new opportunities, and will, go crazy if they are doing the exact same job in 12 months.
They're the engines of innovation and the source of organizational growth.
Exactly. The manager's job with superstars is acceleration, making sure they're continuously challenged, not squashed by bureaucracy, and certainly not blocked by you.
She gives the powerful examples of Catherine Burhen and David Sanderson. They started out helping Scott by babysitting her twins, but Scott quickly recognized their steep trajectory.
Right, and she supported them as they set promotion speed records at Facebook and eventually co-founded their own successful company, Real Good. The manager's key role here was recognizing their intense need for growth and helping them pursue it.
Even if it meant losing them eventually, which is a hard pill for any manager to swallow.
On the other side, and equally important, are the rock stars. These individuals are on a gradual growth trajectory, and they are the Rock of Gibraltar and the absolute backbone of the team.
They achieve exceptional, world-class results, love their work, and are masters of their craft. Crucially, however, they do not want the next bigger job.
Especially if it takes them away from their area of deep expertise. Scott learned this while working with master diamond cutters she managed in Russia. Their meticulous, highly specialized work generated massive amounts of revenue, yet they were entirely happy staying in their current role.
They had perfected their craft and had no desire to deal with the headaches of management or executive politics.
And the book emphasizes the danger of a critical managerial mistake: promoting a rock star into a superstar role they neither want nor are suited for.
You risk forcing a happy, world-class expert into a management role they hate, leading to their failure and demoralization, or losing them from the organization entirely.
Yeah, she shares the story of her former boss, Maurice Templesman, as a young, restless supervisor, grinding away $1 million diamond out of sheer boredom and impatience. That illustrates perfectly why you don't put a steep growth person into a stable role that requires meticulous, consistent stability.
This requires a massive mental shift in how we approach ambition and recognition. For rock stars, recognition should not automatically be tied to promotion into management.
No, it has to focus on fair compensation, significant bonuses and raises, or on non-managerial influence and prestige.
Right. Designate them as gurus or go-to experts for complex tasks. If they enjoy teaching, empower them to onboard new team members, leveraging their deep expertise across the entire organization.
That's exactly what the U.S. Air Force did in World War II. They pulled their very best, most experienced pilots off the front lines and assigned them to train new recruits. It dramatically improved the overall quality of the force over time. They prioritized sharing excellence over maximizing the output of one individual.
This is a systemic issue. Google recognized that management was often the only path to higher compensation and prestige for their engineers.
To counteract this and protect the quality of their management bench, they created a highly prestigious individual contributor career path within engineering.
This ensured that top technical experts weren't forced into management roles just to get a raise or feel recognized, which safeguarded the core of the team.
And this ties back to the story we mentioned earlier, the one that serves as our final provocative thought. T.S. Eliot, one of the greatest poets of the 20th century, worked for years as a clerk at Lloyd's Bank.
He desperately needed the steady income and the routine of a steady job so he could go home in the evenings and write his poetry, his true passion.
But his boss, patronizingly, told him he might one day become a branch manager, pushing him onto a ladder he had zero interest in climbing.
An application of radical candor would have meant his boss recognized Eliot's true ambition wasn't to manage a branch, but to write poetry.
A truly caring boss would have figured out a way to accommodate that. Maybe letting him leave an hour early instead of insisting he climb a ladder he didn't want. That's the challenge to the manager. Letting go of your definition of ambition.
And finally, we have to talk about the hardest part of the management job, addressing poor performance and, when necessary, firing people.
The book argues that waiting too long to fire somebody is not only unfair to the poor performer like Bob, who was deceived for 10 months, but is also demoralizing and damaging to the top performers who end up constantly covering the slack.
So firing is, in this philosophy, framed as sometimes being a moral obligation. It's painful, but necessary.
And it sends an unambiguous signal to the rest of the team about the manager's genuine commitment to excellence and to the fairness of the workload distribution.
Scott learned a painful lesson when she managed Clay, an enormously effective country leader. She decided to promote him into a regional role that required high-level political finesse, a skill he visibly lacked.
And she had internal doubts, but gave in to his persistence and promoted him anyway. Clay immediately made a political error and was later fired.
And Scott concluded she had made a terrible call, putting him in the wrong role for her own convenience or lack of firmness, and he took the professional fall for her mistake.
So managers must be radically candid enough with themselves to own these mistakes, especially when a person is mismatched with a role.
That leads us directly into the collaborative process necessary to achieve the third responsibility: results. Scott realized that great companies like Google and Apple didn't achieve spectacular results through autocracy.
No, but through collaborative processes that pushed decision-making authority closest to the facts. The book calls this the Get Stuff Done, GSD wheel.
The GSD wheel is essentially a 7-step continuous cycle designed to replace hierarchical demands with a systematic way for teams to work together.
Right, to burst the bounds of their brains, achieving far more collectively than anyone could individually. This is how you take great ideas and turn them into finished products.
So step 1 is listen. You cannot effectively lead if you don't know what's happening on the ground. A manager must actively solicit input, not just passively receive it.
You have to create a culture where ideas are genuinely heard, not just tolerated.
Yeah.
And Scott learned the necessity of aggressive listening the hard way at Google when she tried to restructure the AdSense team based on what seemed obvious to her from the top down.
She made the decisions unilaterally, and the immediate result was 3 of her direct reports complaining to Sheryl Sandberg that Scott was too autocratic.
They felt sad and bad and left out, and they quit in quick succession. Sheryl used that perfect analogy. You're spinning a long rope. If you're at the end of the rope, you're hanging on for dear life.
Scott realized simply telling people what to do without listening first not only fails to achieve results, but actively chases talent away.
The book presents 2 primary styles of effective listening. There's quiet listening, which was exemplified by Tim Cook at Apple. He would often remain silent and neutral in expression during meetings, allowing uncomfortable silence to persist.
Which was a deliberate technique to draw out what people really thought, especially the dissenting opinions or what the boss didn't want to hear.
The difficulty, though, is that quiet listening can make the boss seem inscrutable, or even like they're setting a trap. So Cook had to be very careful to continually reassure his team that silence was an invitation for candor, not a prelude to judgment.
And then there's loud listening, famously practiced by Steve Jobs. He would deliberately put a strong, often provocative viewpoint on the table and insist others challenge him back.
Randy Nelson of Pixar described Jobs as a lion. If he roars at you, you'd better roar back just as loudly, but only if you really are a lion, too.
Right. And then there's systemic listening, which Scott implemented at Google. Recognizing that not everyone feels comfortable raising ideas in a meeting, they created an ideas team and a tool like a wiki.
So people could submit ideas, have them reviewed, and vote them up or down. This solved a huge morale problem. It provided a clearer signal than the radio silence that usually follows an idea submission, especially from customer support teams who often felt their ideas were ignored in favor of engineers.
Step 2 is clarify. New ideas are inherently fragile, like a sapling. They can easily be squished by debate before they are fully formed.
So the manager's key role here shifts from ultimate decider to editor, helping direct reports sharpen and clarify their thinking, rather than demanding they present 3 perfect solutions and a recommendation immediately.
This involves creating a safe space to nurture nascent ideas. Susan Wojcicki hosted pre-EMG meetings at Google just to sharpen presentations before the big executive audience.
And Pixar uses a technique called plussing, which is essential here. Instead of just saying, no, that's a bad idea during a critique, you are required to offer a solution to the problem you point out. You have to add value, not just subtract it.
Clarity also demands understanding your audience. Scott cites Georgia O'Keeffe. It is only by selection, by elimination, and by emphasis that we get at the real meaning of things.
Yeah, she uses the example of John Maynard Keynes, whose brilliant economic ideas failed to initially persuade President Roosevelt because he didn't make them drop dead easy for his audience to comprehend. It is the explainer's responsibility to achieve clarity, not the listener's.
Step 3, debate. This is the necessary friction, the noise, the discomfort.
Steve Jobs famously compared this to a rock tumbler. You put in ordinary rocks, and the constant friction and noise of the tumbler turns them into polished stones.
The book stresses the necessary norms for effective debate. You have to keep the conversation focused absolutely on ideas, not on egos.
And people should avoid attributing ownership to ideas. It's not my idea versus your idea. You focus intensely on verifiable facts. And managers must set clear decide-by dates to manage team anxiety and prevent debates from turning into existential, endless struggles.
Crucially, the boss's job in this stage is often counterintuitive. It's to keep the debate going, even when it becomes painful or rancorous. Scott warns managers never to grab a decision just because the debate has become uncomfortable.
Right. Often it is precisely when the team wants the conversation to stop that the most important breakthrough insights emerge.
Okay, step 4 is decide. After the necessary listening, clarifying, and debating, a decision has to be made.
And the core principle of the GSD wheel is that decisions should be pushed into the facts, not dictated by hierarchy. The person with the best, most current information, regardless of their title, should be the decider.
We saw the problem with skipping the previous steps in the example of the manager, Mark. He was asked to present his quarterly OKRs, but had failed to consult his team. He enthusiastically presented a plan that would require everyone to work 85 hours a week.
And his team's silence was absolutely deafening, a classic sign of team resignation.
Exactly. Mark had skipped listen, clarify, and debate and jumped straight into persuade mode. His decision to mandate the 85-hour work week was completely ungrounded in facts or reality.
His team, recognizing the impracticality, wasn't going to execute it. This is the danger of the decider effect, where a manager mistakes their organizational authority for actual decision-making power.
So step 5 is persuade. Once the decision is made, even if it emerged collaboratively, the manager still has to bring the broader team and often the entire organization along.
Persuasion, drawing from Aristotle's classic rhetoric, requires 3 elements. You need logic, your facts and data. You need credibility, expertise plus humility, and you absolutely must have emotion.
Connecting to the listener's feelings, not the speaker's.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Dick Costolo, the former Twitter CEO, was a phenomenal persuader, often using his genuine warm sense of humor and candid responses to connect emotionally with employees and earn their trust, even through rough times.
And credibility requires humility. We see this in Steve Jobs' presentation style, particularly at the 2010 iPad launch. He established Apple's incredible track record, but quickly used the inclusive we, not I, and reminded the audience of Apple's humble beginnings.
It made the decision feel like a collective, passionate venture. Step 6 is execute. This is where the rubber meets the road. Collaborative tasks, meetings, debates, clarifications must not consume all execution time.
So the manager's crucial job is to shield the team from time-wasting mandates and ensure people have sacred time for solitary, focused work.
Sheryl Sandberg was a master of this shielding role. She expected her direct reports to come to 1.1 meetings with problems for her to help resolve, not just status updates. She would act like an explosives expert, diffusing political situations, dispensing with organizational obstacles, clearing administrative rubbish.
Which saved her team enormous amounts of time they could dedicate to execution.
Scott strongly recommends that managers block about 15 hours a week for individual think time, time to execute independently, process thoughts, and clarify their own direction. This time should be held absolutely sacred.
She mentions a highly successful CEO who wouldn't move his 2 hours of daily think time even for a meeting with the president of a country.
Which demonstrates the unwavering priority of execution time. And the final step, 7, is learn. The GSD wheel is a continuous loop. Learning is the willingness to admit results are not good, pivot quickly, and start the cycle again.
And learning requires superhuman discipline because human nature makes managers unreasonably attached to projects they have invested heavily in, regardless of whether the results are poor.
The sunk cost fallacy in action. Drew Houston, the CEO of Dropbox, is cited as a humble, relentless learner, constantly willing to pivot and reshape the product, and even more impressively, reshaping himself as CEO by prioritizing self-improvement over being consistently right. He understood that attachment to a failing project is a weakness, not a virtue.
We've established the foundation of radical candor and the collaborative process for achieving results. Now, let's move into the practical tools for creating a two-way culture of guidance. And we have to start with the hardest part, how a boss can actually get honest criticism.
It is hard because of the instant power dynamics. The moment you become the boss, people see you differently. Scott shares the bizarre anecdote that she, being 5 feet tall, was once described by an employee as tall and intimidating, simply because of her role.
So managers, often obsessed with maintaining respect, often become defensive, which immediately shuts down candor.
Right. To build trust, you have to demonstrate your willingness to listen to criticism and react well to it.
Okay, so technique 1. You are the exception to criticize in private. This flips the script.
Michelle Peluso, CEO of Guilt Group, practices publicly criticizing herself first during 360 reviews. She asks the entire company for help on her weak points. This public self-criticism signals vulnerability and integrity, making it exponentially safer for everyone else to step up and offer their own critiques.
Technique 2. Embrace the discomfort. When you ask a direct report for feedback, their initial response almost universally will be, "Oh, everything is fine."
Because they fear confrontation with authority. You have to prepare to stick with the conversation until you get a genuine response. Scott suggests a practical physical technique. Ask the question and then count to 6 during the ensuing silence.
That forces them to endure the discomfort of that silence, often making it psychologically easier for them to offer a small piece of candid feedback than to endure the prolonged, empty quiet.
That's exactly what Sheryl Sandberg did when she asked a banker for feedback after an IPO meeting. He gave the bland reassurance and she kept pressing, politely but firmly, forcing him to finally be candid.
Another crucial tool is to systematize the input, making it routine and non-threatening. You can't just announce, everyone must feel free to complain. You have to build reliable mechanisms.
Right. Michael Deering of Harrison Metal used a simple orange box, a suggestion box placed in a high-traffic area. He would empty it regularly and answer the questions off the cuff at all-hands meetings, consistently demonstrating public respect for even the most trivial input.
And Google formalized this approach with Management Fix-It weeks.
Following the engineering team's model of fixing bugs, managers would cancel regular meetings for a week and focus relentlessly on fixing the management issues that were most annoying or inefficient for the organization, which were tracked and prioritized publicly by the team itself. This signaled that management took its own faults seriously.
Okay, now let's turn to giving guidance, which the book insists must be given impromptu immediately, informally, and in 2 or 3 minutes.
It's not saved up for a scheduled performance review. Guidance has a short half-life. If you wait too long, the incident is too far in the past to be useful. Or worse, the unsaid criticism explodes later in the manager's mind like a dirty bomb.
The primary tool for giving effective impromptu guidance is the highly practical SBI model: situation, behavior, impact. You have to describe the specific situation where the event occurred,
The specific behavior you observed, and the tangible impact that behavior had on the team, the business, or the other person.
The key instruction is always to show, don't tell. You have to avoid vague, abstract, and judgmental generalizations like calling someone juvenile or lazy.
Instead, you have to describe the specific detail, no matter how painful or small. So instead of saying your presentation was unprofessional, you must say, in your presentation this morning situation, the way you talked about our decision to diversify behavior was persuasive because you showed everyone you'd heard the other point of view. Impact.
The book shares an extreme example of how specific the behavior has to be. Instead of telling an employee they are juvenile, describe the actual behavior.
When we were in that meeting about layoffs situation, you passed a note to Catherine that said, check out Elliot picking his nose. I think he just nicked his brain behavior. Elliot saw it, and the impact was that it pissed him off unnecessarily, making it much harder for you two to work together on the critical Q4 project.
It's so specific. Crucially, when giving guidance, you must do not personalize. This is the key to managing the other person's emotions.
You have to avoid the fundamental attribution error, where you jump to blaming character traits, you're careless, rather than focusing strictly on the external fixable behavior, your work isn't good enough.
This is the fundamental difference between saying you're wrong and the humbler, safer approach of saying, I think that's wrong.
Yes, and Scott emphasizes that the cliche phrase, don't take it personally, is worse than useless, because work is personal, especially when you are challenging someone's output or behavior.
When you use that phrase, you are effectively negating the other person's legitimate feelings, which is completely counterproductive.
Right. If they are upset, the radical candor approach is to acknowledge the emotion. I can see you're mad or frustrated, but I need you to understand the impact of this behavior.
We need to address the sensitive area of bias and gender politics, which can severely complicate candor. The book addresses the common pattern where men often manage women with ruinous empathy.
This stems from cultural training. Many men are conditioned to be gentler with women and fear tears, leading them to consciously pull their punches when criticizing female reports.
But the book stresses that criticism is a gift, and fear of making a woman cry is a form of sexism that leads directly to lower performance.
Managers have to learn to manage their fear of tears, a natural human reaction that often happens when someone feels challenged, and resolve to give criticism in equal, direct measure to men and women.
For women in particular, the problem often lies in the abrasive trap.
Yeah, linguistic analysis shows that women who challenge directly, a behavior necessary for high performance and success, are often penalized with lower ratings and called abrasive, a label applied by both male and female colleagues.
The mitigation tactic Scott recommends is simple, but incredibly powerful: the gender switch. When you are about to give challenging feedback to a woman, mentally substitute a man doing the exact same thing.
Would the feedback still be too aggressive, or would it immediately change in your mind to really knows how to get things done? If your reaction changes, you are falling into the bias trap, and you must correct the language and the judgment.
Finally, to maintain trust and prevent political sabotage in the organization, the manager has to implement a strict no backstabbing rule.
You must never allow one person to talk to you about another behind their back. If they have a problem with a peer, you insist on a direct three-way conversation in person or live if they can't resolve the issue themselves. The manager's job is supportive conflict resolution, not becoming the secret keeper or the punitive judge.
And for self-assessment, managers can track their own progress using the guidance gauging tool. Managers should periodically ask their team, often anonymously, using a quick tool or app, to tag their recent interactions with their manager on the 4-quadrant framework.
Exactly. Was that last piece of feedback radical candor, ruinous empathy, obnoxious aggression, or manipulative insincerity? Getting tags predominantly in the ruinous empathy quadrant means the manager needs to immediately challenge more directly.
The key benefit of gauging is that it quickly reveals where you need to adjust your approach for each individual, ensuring you are relationally and culturally aware in your delivery.
And constantly moving toward the ideal zone of high care, high challenge.
So to quickly recap this comprehensive deep dive into radical candor, your job as a manager is centered on the quality of your relationships with your direct reports.
And these relationships drive your 3 core responsibilities. First, to guide the team with radical candor, eliminating ruinous empathy.
Second, to motivate the team by recognizing and fostering both rock stars, who are the reliable core, and superstars, who are the growth engines.
And third, to drive collaborative results using the disciplined 7 steps of the Get Stuff Done wheel.
The book makes it clear that radical candor is not some unattainable management philosophy. It's a practical, actionable way to operationalize your innate sharing capacity to care personally and to challenge directly.
And by creating this culture, you stop being afraid of being wrong, and instead become totally obsessed with collaboratively finding the right thing, fostering a culture where everybody feels safe and obligated to push for superior results.
And that brings us back to the power of understanding what truly motivates your team, connecting back to T.S. Eliot. Eliot was a rock star in the world of banking, stable, reliable, but his true passion was poetry.
And his boss failed to recognize that Elliot's fulfillment wasn't found in climbing the banking ladder, but in using the stability of that job to fuel his writing.
So here is the question for you to mull over. If you are a boss, do you truly know what your team members need to feel respected and fulfilled?
Whether it's stability, more money, public recognition as a technical guru, or perhaps just a secure environment that allows them to pursue unexpressed ambitions, like an hour to go home and write poetry.
Or are you unintentionally stifling their true professional and personal goals by insisting they climb your ladder instead of their own?
A truly powerful thought on the meaning of work and respect.
Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.